Hi everybody, I am Mohamed Zayani and today we will discuss about an interesting topic. You hear about artificial intelligence everywhere. In the media, in conferences, in technical talks, it's often presented as a fantastic revolution full of opportunities and efficiency and even productivity. We've seen what it does best, generating text, images, code, translating, and even summarizing, for example. And all of that is real. AI has undeniable advantages, and the point is not to deny them today. I'd like to do something different. I'm not going to give you a technical demo or a best of the most impressive features. Today, we are going to look at the other side of this revolution, what it does to our jobs, to the way we learn, to our culture, to our relationships with others, to our planet, and more deeply to our own humanity. The goal is not to scare you or demonize AI, but to take the time to look at what we are almost never shown in keynotes, the human, social, and ecological costs of this technology. In short, we have already heard the speech about the promises of AI. In this talk, we are going to discuss its dark side and what that means to our future and for our children's future. So, for about 30 years now, we've lived through three major technological revolutions that have transformed our daily lives. So, the first one was the internet. At the beginning, it was mostly a tool for researchers and few enthusiasts. Then, gradually, it changed everything the way we get information, work, consume, and entertain ourselves. The internet brought enormous benefits, but also problems we hadn't anticipated, like fake news, addiction to 24/7 information, violations of privacy, cybercrime, and so on. The second major revolution was the smartphone. We went from a simple telephone to a device that concentrates our entire life. Communication, photos, banking, work, leisure. It's extremely convenient, but the downside is just as strong. Screen addiction, reduced attention span, information overload, and difficulty disconnecting. Again, it took society a long time to grasp the real impact on mental health, productivity, and social interactions. Today, we are at the heart of the third revolution, the artificial intelligence. Like the internet and the smartphone, AI brings huge advantages, automating repetitive tasks, decision support, productivity gains, new forms of creation, and new jobs. But as with previous revolutions, the risks are very real. Bias, loss of certain jobs, dependence on tools, ethical issues and data protection, and even an impact on the way we think and learn. So, let's ask a simple question. What is artificial intelligence? I don't want to present it technically, but today we use the term AI everywhere. But in concrete terms, it's not intelligence in the human sense. AI is statistical calculations. AI is a computer system capable of performing tasks that would normally require human intelligence, like recognizing an image, understanding text, translating a language, recommending a product, and so on. But there is an important point. We don't really understand how AI arrives at its results, so at least not in detail. People often talk about black box. Why? Because modern AI models, especially deep learning, are made up of millions or even billions of parameters. We see the input data, we see the output, but the inside, the exact logic that led to the result, is very hard to explain clearly and intuitively. Here's an example to illustrate quickly this idea of black box. Think about what can be done with FPGA and genetic algorithms. So let's quickly have a quick definition for these two terms. An FPGA is a reconfigurable logic circuit. You can reprogram the hardware so it behaves differently. And genetic algorithms are great when you can measure how far you are from the solution. It is inspired by evolution, so you generate a lot of solutions, keep the best ones, crossbreed them, modify them, and repeat until you get something efficient. So if you let a genetic algorithm evolve an FPGA configuration to solve a given problem, you will eventually get a solution that works very well, but whose structure is sometimes completely incomprehensible to humans. You don't really know why this circuit works well, nor how it ended up in that particular form. You will find an usual circuit layout that differs from what an engineer would design, and some circuits are not connected to anything. If you reconnect them, it no longer works. So it's exactly the same with many modern AI models. We train them, we optimize them, they give impressive results, but the precise explanation of why and how is often vague. What's interesting in the history is that it repeats itself. With each new technology, we start with enthusiasm and fascination. Then we discover the side effects, sometimes too late. And society often reacts a step behind, like laws, education, and responsible uses arrive after the fact. The challenge with AI is precisely to try to not repeat exactly the same mistakes, not to wait 10 or 15 years to understand the consequences, but to think right now about how to use it in a responsible, ethical way that is truly beneficial for society. So the question here, aren't we using AI in the wrong way? First, we have to remember that generative AI tools can be extremely dangerous when they are not used by experts. Take the example of medical imaging. AI systems are designed to help radiologists, that is, a trained doctor who can interpret, verify, and contextualize. The danger is when you put these tools in the hands of someone who is not an expert and who will take the result as an absolute truth. It's the same with generative AI like ChatGPT. We've already seen examples of lawyers who used AI to draft a legal brief and ended up with invented decisions and false legal references. If the tool isn't intended for use by someone capable of checking and cross-referencing, it can be dangerous. There is another aspect, less visible but very worrying, is emotional and affective dependence on these systems. Some people in distress have become attached to conversational AIs to the point of entrusting them with the management of their suffering, their imbalance, their pain, and in a few cases, this contributed to dramatic situations, including suicide. Relying on a machine to handle one's psychological distress is extremely risky. When I ask students, do you use generative AI? Almost all of them answer yes, because it's convenient. And it's true, it is really convenient. For example, GPT helps a lot of dyslexic people by rephrasing their ideas and clarifying their text. There are genuinely useful, inclusive, and positive uses. But AI is also a kind of Trojan horse. By using it all the time to think, write, and decide, we end up gradually giving up part of ourselves. We delegate our judgment, our creativity, our intellectual effort. This danger is even more visible with tools that can produce images, videos, and sounds. In the past, we could often recognize a computer generated image. But today, that's less and less the case. We are entering a moment of indistinction. We no longer know whether an image is real or synthetic. We no longer know its nature or its origin. We are seeing the emergence of phantasmatic images, content created to impose a vision and influence people. Groups, clans, and special interest groups produce images that are not true, but which fall within the realm of the possible. The maybe this happened, And little by little, reality can end up aligning with what has been circulating. You can portray people, even public figures, in compromising, humiliating, or violent situations, for example, in prison. This creates a relationship of dissatisfaction and frustration that can lead to further violence. Not happy with someone? Okay, then I will create an image to hurt or discredit them. We are crossing serious thresholds with disconcerting ease. Now, imagine what this could mean in the context of, for example, elections. A deluge of fabricated images and falsified videos overwhelming the population with unverifiable information. Desperate and angry people could use these tools to settle scores and manipulate others' perception and cause harm. If we continue down this path, we risk moving towards a future where we will be increasingly deprived of ourselves, less able to act on our own, to judge on our own, to tell the truth from falsehood. So, yes, AI is extremely convenient, but precisely because it's so convenient, we must all be aware of what we delegate, what we lose, and the risks we place on ourselves and on society. Isn't every technological advance in some ways a step backwards for human beings? We tend to see technology as linear progress, always positive. But some studies are beginning to show the opposite. For example, in some Scandinavian countries, tablets were massively introduced into public education. The intention was good, so let's modernize school, make lessons more interactive and attractive. But studies have shown that this overuse of screen led to loss of certain cognitive abilities among students. Less concentration, less memorization, more difficulty reading in depth. As a result, some of these countries are going back and bringing paper books back to the forefront. We see the same logic with something we all use every day, the navigation apps like Google Maps. When Maps tells us exactly where to go, turn by turn, our ability to orient ourselves, memorize a route, build a mental map of a place is no longer engaged in the same way. We offload part of our cognitive faculties. It's comfortable, but it means we exercise our sense of direction and spatial memory less. All of this shows that we are living through an intellectual turning point. We are developing systems capable of performing tasks that were previously handled by our intellectual and creative faculties, like reading, writing, planning, finding our way, learning. Little by little, we hand them over to machines. In 2025, we start seeing the beginning of the potential damage that generative AI could cause to our mental abilities. As usual, we haven't anticipated anything. We adopt the tools because they're convenient, fast, and impressive, and only later we discover the side effects. An interesting MIT study published in May 2025 points in this direction. Researchers took two groups of students from 10 different nationalities. One group did not use ChatGPT, and the second group could use it freely, as much as they wanted for their work. A few months later, they measured the impact both via brain imaging and practical tests, and the result is a bit worrying. The group that used ChatGPT intensively showed a drop in certain cognitive skills, whereas the group that didn't use it maintained stronger cognitive vitality. In other words, the more we delegate certain intellectual tasks to AI, the more we risk detraining our own brains. So the question is not just, does technology help us? It is also, what is this technology doing to our human capacities, to our way of thinking? And here it becomes urgent to think not afterwards but upstream about what we want to preserve in ourselves as human beings in the age of AI. What's now called the job apocalypse, this term comes straight from Silicon Valley, and it's no longer just a marketing slogan, but real social concern. We're already seeing layoffs, but more importantly, something quieter, fewer hirings, especially in jobs like software developers, because in some contexts, AI can write code faster and cheaper than a human developer. This phenomenon doesn't affect only tech. We are seeing ghost actors and artists created by AI. For example, Tilly Norwood, an actress entirely generated by artificial intelligence. She appears in ads and videos without ever having existed. This has triggered a backlash in Hollywood, where actors have mobilized against the use of their voices, faces, and movements without human control. And it's the same in music. Xania Monet, a singer created by AI and was able to sign contracts with record labels. On Spotify, for example, it is estimated that about 30% of music is already generated by AI. So they are no longer just tools to assist artists, but potential replacements, unfortunately. In recruitment, we are promised less biased systems, more objective, more rational, but behind this rhetoric lies another reality, I think. Tools that mainly serve to reduce the number of humans to be hired or to filter candidates on a massive scale without real human oversight. For a long time, we have relied on Schumpeter's idea of creative destruction, A technology destroys certain jobs but creates others, sometimes more qualified. This was true, for example, in the 80s with the robotization of assembly lines. We lost very physically demanding jobs but created new ones in maintenance, programming, and machine management. Today, the situation is a bit different. In our societies, 70 to 80% of our jobs are service jobs, jobs that rely on our intellectual, relational, and creative abilities. And what we are seeing now is that the systems that are emerging that are capable of performing intellectual tasks very quickly and at very low cost. Companies now dream of AI agents, autonomous agents that can handle many tasks, talk to other systems, make simple decisions, process files, and so on. It's easy to see why the temptation is strong from an economic point of view. It's cheaper, faster, never sick, and never on strike. But in factories, robotization had at least one strong argument, let's say. It reduced physical strain and lowered certain health risks for workers. We could say we automate to protect bodies, let's say. But now that's no longer the case. The jobs threatened are often jobs that required long and costly studies, correspond to a personal aspiration, provide sense of fulfillment, for example, and produce a real value for society, like doctors, teachers, developers, lawyers, psychologists, artists, and so on. So our societies are based on bonds of interdependence. I need a doctor, a baker, a lawyer, a psychologist. We hold together because we depend on each other. Replacing these bonds with automatic systems weakens this social fabric. On ChatGPT's first anniversary, Sam Altman put it very clearly. What you are seeing today is nothing compared to what is coming. And the vision is assistance in every field. AI designer assistant, AI architect assistants, AI private tutors, AI assistants in all areas of life. So we are being sold this as a service, as help, and as an extension of our abilities. However, there is another possible interpretation, a vision of world in which every relationship, job, and human interaction can be replaced or filtered by a system primarily designed to serve the interests of a tech industry. In the future, we already imagine robots that will perform a large number of human tasks. Again, there is potential good, but also a risk of dehumanizing relationships. So the question of the job apocalypse is not just how many jobs will disappear, but also what kind of society do we want? A society structured by human relationships or by optimized flows between artificial agents? And once again, if we don't think ahead, we risk undergoing these choices instead of making them. And what's about education in the age of AI? Because it's not just a school issue, it's a society issue. Today, some teachers literally tell me, I no longer know what I'm here for. With the arrival of generative AI, videos and tutorials everywhere, some teachers feel that their role is reduced to supporting while students ask questions to machines. So basically, if an AI can explain a concept better than I can, am I still useful? At the same time, we see students who no longer want to write. Why pick up a pen if a keyboard and an AI can write for me? Yet, writing helps form our thinking. When you write a sentence, you organize your ideas and clarify what you really think. Abandoning writing isn't just changing tools, it's giving up an essential intellectual exercise. So, what is at stake here is not just chaos in the classroom, but echoes of chaos throughout society. Because education is one of the foundations of society, and it's where we learn outside the family to live with others, to confront reality, difficulty, and contradiction. So, school is not just knowledge, it's an external space. We encounter other logics, we take symbolic hits, we realize we don't know everything, that we can be wrong, and that we can improve. We learn with teachers who know more than we do. We also learn with our classmates, with whom we sometimes argue and disagree. That is otherness, the encounter with pluralism, with the relationship to the other. Classmates are not like us. They don't think like us, they don't come from the same background, they don't share the same opinions. This dimension is threatened with disappearance if we reduce education to dialogue between a student and a screen. The other person is an entity of exchange, a vector of knowledge, emotions, and experiences. The other brings things we could never find alone. By contrast, purely technical systems can lead to a delegitimization of others. Why listen to my teacher, my classmate, my parent if ChatGPT answers me directly, right? Little by little, we withdraw into ourselves, into our screen, or into our bubble. This withdrawal carries another risk, a kind of new slavery, an emotional dependence on systems. Instead of building our identity in the eyes of others, in conflict, in discussion, we seek in the silent validation of a tool that always answers and never really contradicts us. And we are already seeing it. The other has disappeared from many of our living spaces. People walk in the street, eyes on their phones, bumping into each other without seeing one another, because they are very busy, but not with other humans. Yet, the other has a transformative power. The other unsettles us, disrupts us, forces us to reposition ourselves, creates a relationship between I and you that builds a bond we cannot form by ourselves alone. We all have a lack, an insufficiency. Before, this lack was filled by our relationships with others, teachers, friends, classmates. Today, increasingly, this lack is filled by technical systems, artificial counterparts. So the question for education is not just how do we integrate AI into schools, how do we preserve otherness, the relationship to others, as the core of learning at a time when everything pushes us to shut ourselves away in front of a screen. And also, there is a link between ecology and artificial intelligence. You often hear people say, I don't fly anymore, I pay attention to my ecological impact. That's obviously a good thing, but there is a kind of contradiction. If at the same time we massively use tools like ChatGPT without ever asking about their energy cost, ecological awareness cannot be sliced into pieces. Conscience cannot be divided. You can't be very strict about flying and completely blind about digital tech. What we know today is that over the course of a year, the energy consumption of all our generative AI requests can be much higher than the footprint of one or two flights in a year, depending on how intensely you use them and the energy mix powering the data centers. In other words, what happens in the cloud is not immaterial. It's servers and data centers that consume a huge amount of electricity and must be cooled, powered, and maintained. More and more articles and studies are coming out about the energy consequences of generative AI. Water consumption to cool data centers, carbon dioxide emissions linked to training and using the models, the multiplication of infrastructure needed to meet global demand. So the question is not just, is AI convenient? Is it efficient? But also, what is the ecological price of this convenience? And are we willing to accept it in the line with our ecological values? If we want to be coherent in our approach to ecology, we must accept that digital technology, and in particular generative AI, is part of the problem as much as part of the potential solution. So here too, we must learn to use it with moderation, discernment, and responsibility. For example, training GPT-3 used more than 1,200 megawatt hours of energy. This caused about 550 metric tons of carbon dioxide emissions. That's like a car driving for 1.2 million miles. And also, what about the culture in the age of AI? Cultural professions are on the front line. Translators, film dubbers, composers, singers, writers, all these jobs that require time, work, and sensitivity are now facing tools that can translate, write, compose, and sing automatically. There is also intellectual devaluation of those who use AI. You sometimes hear, if you use AI to write, it's because you can't think for yourself. Or if your music is generated, are you still an artist? This judgment is debatable, but it reflects discomfort. We feel that AI replaces part of the intellectual and creative effort, also that this diminishes the symbolic value of the work. But culture is not just entertainment, you know? It's a work that shake you, disturb you, and make you see the world differently. That's about the culture. A book, a movie, a song can be opportunity to decenter yourself, to step outside yourself to encounter another perspective. But with AI, we can build a kind of self-literature, self-cinema, and also self-music. Books generated from our tastes, for example, movies that resemble what we already like, and playlists that loop around the same style. So we can live in a cultural universe perfectly aligned with our preferences without real surprise, basically. If you invite friends over, each can come with their own cultural bubble, and AI recommendations will tend to confirm what they already like, rather than exposing them to something truly new. We lose that experience where someone plays you a track they love and that you, at first, would never have chosen. There are already strong reactions in the cultural world. For example, animation film directors protested in front of France Inter because France Télévisions was considering using AI for some productions. These directors are passionate people who devote their lives to creating frame by frame, crafting sensitive worlds, but for them, seeing AI enter this field feels like a dispossession of their profession, their art, and their reason for being. So the cultural question here is not can AI produce cool, fast, and cheap content, but it's also how much space do we leave for the unexpected, the aesthetic shock, the encounter with a work that doesn't resemble us? Do we want a culture that confronts us with others, or a culture that locks us into a mirror of ourselves generated by algorithms? Last but not least, I want to talk about central but often misunderstood point, which is the language of AI. The language of AI is not the same as a human language. What an AI model does is train on a huge corpus of existing texts and digitized images. It subjects all that to the mathematical and statistical processing. Its operation is based mainly on probabilistic correlations, which word is most likely to follow another word in a given context. In other words, it's a regime of conformity. What dominates are recurrence and high statistical frequency, and AI produces what appears most often, basically. It does not invent a unique voice or it averages voices. The result is often smooth language deprived of vitality, recurring turns of phrase, expressions that come back according to the same patterns, a kind of standardized style. This language is not neutral. It's designed and optimized industrial framework to generate profits for tech companies. It's not just a communication tool, it's a product serving a business model. By contrast, humans each build a unique relationship to language. Our language depends on the association of ideas we make, our history, our reading, our encounters. Basically, singularity is precisely the fact that no one makes exactly the same association as someone else. When I speak, I don't know exactly which word I will say in 1 or 2 seconds. I don't calculate probabilities. I have an indeterministic relationship to language. I discover what I truly think as I speak. With AI, we risk getting used to a standardized, predictable, repetitive language, And little by little, we risk abandoning the plurality of voices, styles, and ways of speaking. There is another issue. We are no longer just facing search engine like Google, where we send queries and receive a list of links. We are facing systems that talk to us in fluent language and can be hyper personalized based on how we interact with them. These systems have a cognitive advantage. They give the impression of knowing everything, they answer quickly, they phrase things well, and they can use this advantage to nudge us into commercial transactions, buying, subscribing, clicking, staying longer in their ecosystem. We also see a huge risk of astroturfing, the artificial creation of fake opinion movements, fake consensus. It would be naive to think that political groups, lobbies, interest groups won't use these systems at planet scale to create new games of influence over people's minds. All this doesn't just come from the technology itself, but from irresponsible uses of these systems, which gradually take place of a human interlocutors in our lives and guide us explicitly or implicitly in our choices. Talking about AI language is therefore not a minor technical detail. Talking about AI language is therefore not a minor technical detail. It's about highlighting AI's consequences for the future of society, for how we think, speak, and influence each other, and the future of our children who will grow up in a world where part of the speech addressed to them will be produced not by humans, but by systems optimized to capture their attention and steer their behavior. So when we project ourselves into the future, we must look at something simple. It's no longer just us talking to systems, it's systems talking to us. Already today, we have assistants that answer us, suggest things, prompt us. Tomorrow, this will intensify. Less working together, fewer situations where we have to collaborate, less need to ask for directions in the street, fewer teachers in front of us, replaced by AI tutors and or agents. We're heading towards a world where the other becomes less and less legitimate, and we need others less and less. This implies isolation, a form of solitude, in a weird way accompanied by a sense of power. I can do everything with my systems without depending on anyone. In such anti-humanity, little by little, systems handle our physical tasks, then increasingly our intellectual tasks. They take on many jobs and responsibilities. So, what is left for us? What does a human life look like in a world where we work less, we decide less, we help each other less, and technical systems act in our place? We risk tipping into a world where we increasingly excluded from processes and less active. And this doesn't concern only the digital world. We are already seeing the development of physical AI, robots that will arrive in massive numbers over the next 10 years. Imagine a typical day in this future. You no longer need to work, cook, wash dishes, go out to do your shopping. Everything is handled by systems, software, and robots. On a physical level, we know exactly what this produces. Without exercise, muscles atrophy. If you stay in bed for 60 days, your physical abilities drop dramatically. On a cognitive level, it's the same. If for 60 days you delegate most of your intellectual tasks to systems, cognitive atrophy begins. So imagine what that could mean over years or decades. The stakes are extremely serious, and the world will no longer be the same. And above all, our role in this world will no longer be the same. So the real question for the future is not how far will AI progress, but rather what kind of a humanity do we want to remain in a world where so many things can be done in our place? Do we want to be assisted or gradually replaced? And what do we absolutely want to preserve as a human experiences in this rapidly approaching future? I'd like to end by coming back to the essential. Throughout this presentation, we've seen that AI is not just another tool like any other, and it affects what is at the heart of our collective life, our work, our education, our culture, our relationship to truth, our relationship to others, and even our relationship to ourselves. We've seen that as with the internet and the smartphone, we entered this revolution without really anticipating it. We discover the effects once they're already there: loss of certain skills, emotional dependencies, confusion between true and false. The risk is not that machines will wake up one day and dominate us. The risk is that we gradually give up exercising our faculties, stop confronting others, accept being less autonomous, and let systems decide, sort, and direct things in our place. AI is not evil in itself. It can help people with learning difficulties, doctors with diagnoses, and researchers, creators, and teachers. It can relieve certain tasks, open up possibilities, but it can also, if we do nothing, crush plurality, weaken our bonds, and make us more passive and manipulable. So, what should we do? It's not about saying yes or no to AI. That question is already outdated, I think. The question is, in which areas do we want AI and under what conditions? Which tasks do we want to keep as specifically human? What rights, protections, and regulations do we demand? What do we want to pass on to our children? Mere usage skills or also the capacity for distance, critic, and discernment? In short, the real question is not what will be the future of AI. The real question is what will be our future as human beings in a world with AI. This future is not written. It won't be decided only in San Francisco or in a few labs. It also depends on what we accept, refuse, debate, and demand as citizens, as teachers, as parents, workers, and creators. If this presentation can be useful in any way, I would like it to be for this: that you live with the desire not to undergo this revolution, but to take part in it consciously. By asking questions, demanding safeguards, and defending what you consider non negotiable in the idea of being a human. That is a debate we need to start now together, I think. Thank you for your time. Thanks for listening. Let's meet each other in another session.